Hi there. Welcome to Conservation Conversations. This is where we dive deep into the trials and triumphs of conservation in Africa. And on this journey, we'll be dissecting Africa's conservation challenges and uncovering some really cool homegrown solutions. I'm your host, Elizabeth Gitari Mitaro. Welcome to this episode on What They Don't Tell You in Law School, Environmental Law 101. Now, as the next generation of lawyers prepares to enter the legal profession, we are here to help you navigate this transition with insights you won't find in textbooks. This podcast has been on my mind for potentially, literally 3 years. I've been talking to my mentors and my colleagues and saying we need to get this thing done until finally a lady I really, really respect and one of my mentors last year told me, Liz, if you're going to do this thing, stop talking about it and just go to a studio and start talking. So I'm really, really glad that we got to do this and that we've now gone to 10 episodes and we are winding up our first ever season. And we wouldn't be able to do this were it not for you guys who are listening and who tune in, who call me and send me text messages and WhatsApp and on Instagram and LinkedIn telling me of one thing that has helped you from this podcast, a new insight that you've gotten. And also those who've challenged some of the things that I've said and some of the opinions that I hold, which is why essentially this podcast exists, to create democracy and conversation from all of us as citizens of the Republic in the discourse on how we manage our natural resources. And so in this special episode, we are going to break down what to expect in the job market, from opportunities in environmental law to the realities of legal practice. And I will also share my journey from law school to admission to the bar, and hopefully give a few pieces of advice on carving out a career in the growing field of environmental law as an African lawyer or advocate, and essentially just give you a little sneak preview into the challenges that I've encountered and share the lessons that I've learned so that you can not make them, the mistakes that I made, and essentially join the workforce in environmental law. And this is a special episode as well because it is sponsored by our very, very first sponsor to the podcast, Wakililax, and it is dedicated to every soon-to-be lawyer stepping into this exciting new chapter. And our sponsor for today, Wakililax, specializes in advocates apparel, offering wigs, gowns, bibs, shirts for both purchase and lease. So if you know anyone who's getting admitted to the bar and they need the advocate's regalia, the wig, the gown, the shirt, the bib, you can refer them to Wakililax. You'll find them on our show notes below in the podcast, and you can also find them on Instagram. I believe we'll also link their number down below. And so let's get into it. So let's start with how did I end up being a lawyer? And that's a complicated, maybe it's a complicated question. First time I was ever asked that question, I think I was in class 6. I had just read Ben Carson's Gifted Hands and I was sure I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. Anyone who knows me knows this is quite funny. I was 100% sure I was going to be a neurosurgeon, and I started working hard towards it. And then I think in class 7, we got a library, a school library, a formal school library that was open. I think some minister came to open it or something like that. And I am a lover for books, mainly because my mother is or was a teacher of English. She has a master's in linguistics, and you could not get away with not reading. And I think we got a TV in the house quite late in life. I think we were in primary school. And so evenings were spent reading newspapers, reading storybooks. Anyone in my generation will remember, storybooks like Nyakeo and the Chief's Bus, was it? So just tiny little storybooks, and there were, I was besotted with books. And so I changed that to maybe perhaps I do want to be a librarian. And I did want to be a librarian because I thought, if you're working in a library, then you will end up spending time in the library. Then I went to high school. And, I joined debate club and all of these things. And, people kept saying, oh, you're a good orator, you speak well, so on and so forth. Maybe you can become a lawyer. And I thought, yeah, that's a good thing. And then the only lawyers I knew were commercial lawyers and general practitioners. And they looked like they had money. So I was like, maybe, yeah, law is a good entrance to money. That's ideally what I thought. But when we're filling in those JABS forms, I think now it's called COOPS, whatever, the organization that directs and decides on university admission for students, for Form 4 students. So when we're filling out those forms, number one, I was really, really good in chemistry. Like it's something that came easily to me. I was passing it. I was always having B pluses and above in chemistry. I loved it. It was really exciting. I loved English and literature. So my three choices were, the first one was law, the second one was chemistry, industrial chemistry, and I think the third one was literature, English literature, something like literature in English, something like that. So anyway, I find myself in University of Nairobi, and I'm excited because the journey to becoming a lawyer has started, to commercial law, to litigation, so on and so forth. Litigation meaning being in court and so on and so forth. And I was really, really excited about the journey. My campus experience was fantastic. It opened me up in terms of the networks that I made and the friends that I made and the different ways of thinking. I had come from, quote unquote, the village. I had attended the same school from standard 1 to class 8 and then went across. It was a Catholic missionary center. So you had nursery school, then you had class 1 to 8, then you had a high school in the same complex, so on and so forth. So that's where I went to, in a county that's not in Nairobi, in Embu County. And so I had no sort of exposure. The only time I think I only came to Nairobi was when we are going to visit relatives, or when I was coming for my eye checkups and to get my glasses fitted. And I was with my parents, so there was not a lot of exposure. So campus really helped in terms of my exposure and talking to people and reasoning and logical thinking and all of it. It was a fantastic experience. And so I got into environmental law in campus by flux, in the sense that I always knew that I wanted to do commercial law, because remember, we're doing law for, number one, to teach law, because my parents were teachers, and I really loved the idea of teaching, and I'd always interacted with their students and how they had impacted their lives and so on. And so those stories really appealed to me. And I thought, maybe one day I'll be a lecturer of law, but mainly to do commercial law. And so when we were transitioning from second year to third year, there was, I think, a 2-year gap. I mean, not a 2-3 month gap before you got into your third year. And third year is when you're choosing your elective units. And I got late to come back to school, and all the nice courses that I wanted to do had been taken up. Obviously, we've had foundational courses on corporate law, company law, so on and so forth, contracts law. But now in third year and fourth year, you now get into international economic law, international human rights law. So a more specialized form of learning. And I wanted to get the commercial law courses, but all of those classes were full. And so the classes that were open were land law, there was environmental law, so on and so forth. And I was taught by a fantastic teacher called Dr. Iwana Ramel Polska, who was the then, I think, head of environmental law at UNEP. I was taught property law by Professor Kameri Mbote. And all of this, teachers had a huge impact in my life in terms of deciding, well, I did not know that environmental law existed and it was so broad, and I immediately fell in love with it and decided, okay, so I'm going to specialize in environmental law. And so I was having a conversation with my dissertation supervisor, Professor Albert Muma, and I was telling him how I'm finalizing my dissertation, I'm getting to graduation, I'm a bit anxious because I don't know about environmental practice, and he's a fantastic environmental law professor, and I was sharing my angst with him, and he said, well, the thing that you need to do is you need to get into environmental law immediately. If you try and get into commercial law as a holding, position, or you get into a general practice firm, or you get into a firm that specializes in criminal law, as you're waiting to find an opportunity in environmental law, it's going to take you a lot longer, because you're going to get used to the money, and you're going to get used to the comfort, and you're not going to look for those opportunities that really align with what you want to do. So do everything in your power to find a place, even if it's volunteering, to get your foot in the door. In the firm, in a firm that specializes in environmental law, or in an NGO or whatever. And so that's the route I took. And I told everybody and anybody in my networks that I am looking for work as an intern, as an entry-level lawyer, and as I'm waiting to go to Kenya School of Law. And I want that opportunity specializing in conservation law or environmental law or whatever it is, or in terms of conservation and environment. And so I sent letters everywhere. I sent them to NEMA, I sent them to Kenya Forest Service. I applied to National Museums of Kenya because they have an aspect of conservation, environmental. I literally sent applications and during those times, it was literally sending going physically with your CV and dropping it at that particular office. People were very guarded about their emails and the email to the organization, and it's for official purposes, it's not for receiving CVs, so on and so forth. So no one was really open with their email addresses, much less like now where one can have several email addresses and distribute them, whatever. And so that's how I ended up doing an internship at the National Museums of Kenya. And then, I left there, went to Kenya School of Law. Actually, before I went to Kenya School of Law, I worked for Africa Wildlife Foundation for a while, for, was it 3 or 4 years, and then left and went to work for Wildlife Direct. And post Wildlife Direct is when I decided to find opportunities in academia so that I can get into my dream of teaching, because I really wanted to teach law. Then this is all after I'd finished my master's, and the rest is history, as it were, because after Wildlife Direct I set up the farm, Green Brief Law, and that's where I've been since then. And so that's a short outlook of my journey so far and how I ended up in law. So what do they not tell you in law school? Let's have a conversation about that. So what do they not tell you in law school? They do not tell you a lot. There's a lot you learn after you've gotten admitted to the bar. And speaking of the bar, our sponsor today is Wakili Lux, a company that specializes in advocates apparel, offering wigs, gowns, bibs, shirts for both purchase and leasing. If you're a practicing advocate and you need a gown to go to Court of Appeal or to go to Criminal High Court, reach out to Wakili Lux. They will sort you out. If you're a student who's just getting admitted to the bar or you're expecting to get admitted to the bar, reach out to Wakili Lux and they will support you and provide the necessary apparel that you need to look your best on that particular day. We are leaving their contacts down in the description box and in the show notes. Please click on them, follow them on Instagram, send them a WhatsApp message and inquire, and they'll send you all the information that you need from them. So there are quite a number of things that you do not learn in law school that you quickly find out when you get into practice, and how good of a lawyer you turn out to be, I think, has a direct correlation in how fast you learn these lessons. Lesson number one, law is one of the most interdisciplinary sectors in the country, in the world. It is not enough for you to be a reader of law books, for you to only have read Wolowitz on torts, so on and so forth. There is a lot of interrelation with other sectors. Let me give you an example. In this podcast, we speak a lot around climate change issues. Now, climate change law is underpinned by a lot of science and scientific information. So if you're not able to distill what an IPCC report is saying, then you will not be able to apply law in the sector of climate change. If you are talking about forest conservation, and you're litigating for protection of a forest, and you have to make, and one of your arguments is that there is impacts on biodiversity, complexity, and populations. That's not a statement you get from the rooftops. You have to be able to analyze the science around population density. You have to be able to know potentially what some of the scientific names for these animals are. You have to be able to understand the policy aspects of it. You have to be able to understand the economics of it. And so the biggest thing that you can do is learn how to integrate other disciplines into your environmental law work and endeavors. So read as much as you can outside of the areas of law, and not only academic papers or issues. Look at theories and jurisprudence, schools of thought, and so on and so forth. So have a look at how are other sectors impacting your practice of law. And this is not only true for environmental law, it is also true for most of the other disciplines of law. You have to be able to understand that and understand those particular sectors and be curious about them as well. Be curious about engineering, be curious about medicine. Right now, I have a colleague who specializes in surrogacy law, and they went and they did a master's in science in gametes or something like that, so that they can understand how do we apply law to the area of surrogacy and to alternative reproductive health. When we are arguing that this person is a mother and there's a DNA link, do you actually know what that means? When we are talking about rights of a father, and we are distinguishing between a person who provides the gametes versus the person who actually raises the child, so on and so forth. So it's incredibly important for you to have a multidisciplinary mindset and to come into it with a multidisciplinary understanding and curiosity. Number two, collegiality. And collegiality is incredibly important in the sense of how you treat your colleagues, how you treat your fellow students, how the relationships that you build at that level, okay? And how well of an all-rounded human being you are to the people in the sector and your colleagues in the sector. And this relationship is why it will be easy for you to find someone to hold your brief in court without jumping over 1,001 loops, as it were, or hoops, as it were. It is why you will make negotiations with the other party in respect to the negotiations out of court settlements that you might be involved in. So collegiality is incredibly important. Build those relationships now. When you're in your Kenya School of Law meetings, group discussions, so on and so forth, have a collegial sort of outlook and interaction with your colleagues. The third issue is you have to quickly learn how to provide the solution that the client is interested in. And a lot of the times, the client will not come to you telling you, I have this particular issue in contract law, or I have this particular issue in criminal law. They will come to your office and give you a story. It is upon you to distill from the story that the client tells you what it is that they want to get out of it. And I've gotten into the habit of asking my clients, what do you want to get out of this? What is the goal that you're working towards? Because if the client is not so much interested in how to get there, they just want the end goal. For example, if a client comes to you and says, I just want this person to fulfill the end of their bargain. We had agreed that they would supply me with 10 tons of tomatoes every week. They have been providing under 10 tons over the past 4 weeks, and they're now in breach of contract. I want them to provide the 10 tons. Now, if immediately your head goes to, oh, yes, we can sue them for breach of contract, we can do this, blah, 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 then you will put your client in a lot more trouble than they're in and give them a lot more to worry about. The client has already said, all I want is specific performance of the contract. And most clients often do not want the headache of litigation. More often than not, they do not want the headache of litigation. So if you're able to bring the other party to the table for negotiations and having a conversation, this does not mean that you give away your client's rights and you make it very easy for the other party to essentially walk all over your client. No. It just means that you make your client's life easier so that they understand and you distinguish yourself from other providers of the same service. It is not always that every single problem must end up in court. It is not always that a problem that sometimes a problem will present itself as a contractual issue, but when you actually interrogate it, it's not a legal problem. It's a problem with respect and humanity. It is that your client is feeling disrespected, or it is that your client is being arrogant in the situation. And so it's a lot of the issues there can be resolved with mediation and having a conversation and approaching it and providing a different perspective. It's not always that you will find a problem being addressed by law. Sometimes it will be addressed by policy. Sometimes it will be addressed by psychology. Sometimes it will be addressed by external support by other members, for example. So it's very, very important to think about what is the client asking for and what is the client's goal and how do I best provide what it is they want. Okay. Next is going over and above in what the service that you're providing. Sometimes I keep telling my staff in the office that, especially the advocates, tell them that we are not doctors. So there is no time that a client will call you in the middle of the night and it's a life or death situation. And most of the cases that we do in criminal law are pro bono in nature. We reserve criminal law, our practice in criminal law for pro bono cases, people who can't afford legal counsel, and you can clearly see that it's a needy case, so on and so forth. And so, save for criminal law perspectives where someone has been arrested in the dead of the night, then that's the only sort of situation where a client would be insistent on crossing the boundaries of after work hours, so on and so forth. However, this does not mean that if a client asks for something or wants to have a conversation at 6 p.m., at 7 p.m., at 6:30, or any time after 5, or any time before 8 a.m., your answer is, my work day has not started. You have to consistently go over and above, both in the way that you treat clients and in the way that you deliver to clients, and ensure that in law school, there's a course I think called Legal Practice and Ethics, and in that class you will be told that your client's problems are not your problems. I often disagree with that particular way of legal practice, because if your client's problems do not keep you up at night, it means that, and by keeping you up at night, I don't mean literally you're not able to sleep because of your client's problems, but you're bothered about it. You're trying every possible way to find a solution for your client, and that is what going over and above is. If you approach it as a means of earning money, and that this is a client who's paying you and all you're focused on is just their pay, then you're going to find yourself in quite a bit of trouble. Now, the last thing that I'd like to highlight, well, the second last thing, is issues of integrity. Very quickly, we all know who the lawyers who have integrity issues are. We all know who the magistrates and the judges who have integrity issues are. It is not a secret that one is taking a bribe. It is not a secret that one is giving a bribe. Okay? And your lack of integrity ultimately impacts your client. And law is one of the very few, law and medicine actually, are two of the businesses that most rely on referrals, okay? And someone will not refer you if how you handled their work had negative consequences on their brand. So that when someone asks, oh, who's your lawyer? It is so and so. And that automatically then means, oh, so you're comfortable with giving a bribe or you're comfortable receiving a bribe, so on and so forth. So issues of integrity are incredible. Is it hard to walk the tightrope of it? It's incredibly hard. You will find clients who come to your office and say, I have this matter, but tunaweza ona judge. How can we speak to the judge? How can we speak to the magistrate? Can you get a meeting with them? Immediately a client starts telling you, can you get a meeting with the magistrate or with the judge? Then you definitely know that what they want to meet the judge for, the magistrate for, has zero integrity in it. And so you have to remove yourself. There are situations where I have had to not take certain types of clients because then it is clear that they're not looking for a legal solution. They're looking to a solution that is marred in corruption and integrity issues. And so you have to be courageous about saying no to giving bribes and saying and being keeping your integrity, as it were. And then lastly is professionalism. Now, professionalism does not necessarily mean you're wearing a suit and tie or a suit every time you go to work. Yes, that is a part of it. Look at the advocate's code of conduct on dressing and adhere to it. Don't go to court in pink shirts, in pink or yellow suits and green trousers and loafers instead of proper shoes and so on and so forth. So make sure that from a presentation angle, when you meet that person as an advocate, they are able to give you the respect that you deserve from a professionalism perspective. And this is in both professional circles as well as your social circles, okay? You cannot say that you're a prim and proper lawyer during the day when you're in court, but come at night, the tabloids are full of your shenanigans of what you are doing, You would be an affront to the institution of law. Professionalism also, from the perspective of how you conduct your work and how you provide services to clients and so forth. Don't be those lawyers who call their clients my dear, be professional in how you handle your clients and give them the respect that they deserve, and they will in turn give you the respect that you deserve. These are not issues that you will necessarily learn in a classroom, but there are issues that will come in incredibly handy when you get into practice, when you set up your own firm, or even if you're working for somebody else or an organization, so on and so forth. I think one more thing around professionalism and law as a profession. There are so many facets and areas to practice as a lawyer. And I think we have been lied to that the only way, the only prestigious way to practice law is if you have your name on the door, if you are the owner of the firm. And this leads to a lot of shaming of advocates who are really good employees, but they will not make good entrepreneurs. And you also find really good entrepreneurs who end up being straddled by fear because they want to keep being an employee or working for somebody else. Take time to find out what side of the divide you fall on. What makes a good employee? What makes a good entrepreneur? In legal practice, you have grinders, the people who actually do the legal work. You have the hunters, the people who go out to find the clients, so on and so forth. Find out where you lie. And if you're setting up a firm, if you're a hunter, find a really good grinder to either be your partner or to be an employee within the firm, and treat your employees well. If you are a grinder, then find someone who's able to be a hunter and bring the clients to the farm. Because then if you have those two sort of synergies in the way that the work is done, then you will be able to provide the services of a lawyer in the way that they should be. And just as a reminder, our sponsor today is Wakililax. Wakililax provides advocates regalia, all the gowns, the wigs, the bibs and the shirts for admission to the bar, as well as gowns and shirts that you will need to appear before the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal, the Criminal Court, so on and so forth, the Criminal High Court, to be able to represent your clients. Reach out to Wakililux. We've left their details on the show notes, and as well as their contact information. Follow them on Instagram. They're called Wakililux on Instagram. We'll also leave their WhatsApp number and you can connect with them, and they will give you all the details that you may require. The last question I would love to address, or the issue that I'd love to address in this episode, is a deep dive into environmental law, what it entails, how is it growing, and how you can engage in it. So, environmental law. Environmental law is such a broad area of law, and it is an area that has a lot of opportunity to engage in as an advocate. You can practice as a generalist in environmental law, in the sense that you have a more than average understanding of all the various facets of environmental law. You can also choose to focus on specific areas. For example, forest law, wetlands law, wildlife conservation law, land as a natural resource law, climate change law. There's so many, mining, so on and so forth. And so it's important for you to find your niche, and you pair your interest and your capacity in resolving a single problem within that particular niche. So if it's climate change law, for example, let me give an issue with climate change law. I focus in climate change law on frameworks that support communities to be participants in climate finance systems, as well as climate adaptation and mitigation systems. So supporting communities to figure out how do we engage in this sector, number one, to solve the planetary crisis of climate change, but also to derive economic and financial benefit from it, okay? Through, for example, carbon credits contracts, biodiversity contracts, so on and so forth, climate financing agreements, so on and so forth. Over and above that, there are other facets in climate change law. And I also engage in climate change law from a perspective of regulatory frameworks and legal and policy frameworks, and helping distill the formulation and the implementation and enforcement of policies and laws within the climate change space. This does not mean that these are the only areas in climate change law. So it's important to find what your niche is in a specific area of environmental law, and then hone in on it, remembering what we said at the start around the multidisciplinary nature of environmental law, allowing for how other sectors and how other areas of practice impact the particular niche that you have chosen to practice in. Additionally, from a niche perspective, you can also look at it in terms of who you work for, okay, and who your client is or your employer is in that particular environmental law practice. So you can be an environmental lawyer who's employed by a firm that specializes in environmental law. You can be an environmental lawyer who is in-house counsel in an NGO that works on environmental conservation or forest conservation or wetlands conservation, whatever it is. You can be an environmental lawyer who works for NEMA, the National Environment Management Authority, as a litigator for NEMA, or as a policy formulator and a legislative formulator. You can also work for the AG's office as a drafter or a policy advisor in areas of environmental. There's so many, and there's so much opportunity in the areas of environmental law. All you have to do is, number one, identify your niche, and identify your niche both from your areas of interests, but also additionally from your areas of expertise, the thing that comes easily for you in that particular area or structure. For example, there are people who practice in areas in the area of environmental law from a criminal justice perspective, and I did a little bit of that for about 3 to 4 years of my life, and it was awfully interesting and fantastic. And also remember that just because you've picked one area of environmental law to practice in when you're 23 does not mean that for the rest of your year until you retire at 90 or until you die at 95, whatever it is, that is the only area you will ever practice in. Be versatile and be capable of changing with the times and figuring out what are the upcoming concepts of law that we can integrate into environmental law. What are the things that we need to include from a legal perspective, all right? When conversations around climate change started in the early 90s, in the late 80s, law had not yet been identified as a tool to facilitate climate change solutions. Now it is, and there's a huge supermajority of lawyers who are actually involved in climate change law. And so, for example, we are seeing surgeons of AI and artificial intelligence. Is there a link to environmental law? Right now, I'm not very sure whether there is a direct link. Is there an indirect link? Yeah, there is an indirect link. Perhaps it can be used as an opportunity to fund conservation efforts. For example, when blockchain started and creation and sale of NFTs became very popular. I think it was about 5 years ago. Landscapes, drawing of landscapes as an NFT or landscape-based NFTs became popular as a means of funding that particular ecosystem. If you have a picture of, say, the Mara migration and it's an NFT, and the artist is saying that I'm going to sell this, or proceeds from this is going to fund conservation here, and how to link those two. So there are always areas of law that are coming up, and we just need to keep having creative minds and curious minds into how do we integrate into this new thing that we are experiencing as a civilization. And so finding your niche in those two facets is what I would really encourage you to do from an environmental law perspective. Reach out to us, reach out to me on Instagram, on LinkedIn, even as a comment on the show notes, as a comment in this podcast on Spotify as well as on YouTube, and let's interact there. If you have any additional questions, I'd be more than happy to assist. And once more, we are really, really grateful to our sponsor for today's episode, Wakili Lux. Wakili Lux is a company that specializes in advocates apparel, offering wigs, gowns, bibs, and shirts for both purchase and lease to lawyers and advocates who are practicing and they need these gowns and wigs and bibs to appear in court, as well as to advocates who are just joining the profession on their admission day, on their bar admission day. And so for all of you young lawyers out there preparing for admission to the bar. And that's all the time we have for today on Conservation Conversations. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do hope that you've learned something new and that you actually feel empowered to take action towards a more sustainable future for all of us. Remember, even small changes make a huge difference. This conversation doesn't stop here. Please do connect with us on our social media channels at greenbrief_KE and at Liz Gitari across all platforms. We'll put all the links in the description box below. Until next time, keep well and keep changing the world.